hygiene teaching given out in the village situation. During times of severe mourning, women may cut some finger digits off with an axe. See the ravages of leprosy and the bark bandage used before cotton bandages were available. This is the type of old bush wards that were used first. Not real good, with only one door and no windows and a lot of smoke. A new ward built with sawn timber, with windows, a board floor, pit blind wall coverings and a corrugated iron roof built whenever funds became available. On one station, which was very hilly, a bush material clinic was built with plenty of windows and an iron roof, and it's certainly well drained in the case there's a lot of rain around. Soon as funds were available, permanent clinics were built out of permanent sawn timber, iron roof. Quarters built of bush materials with an iron roof over the wood-burning stove area to lessen the danger of fire. Typical of nursing sisters' transport once roads were built. Some years later, a site was chosen for a hospital complex to be built. This was complete with surgery, dental, medicine, dispensary, laboratory, lecture room, outpatients department, laundry, 6 wards, and doctors and nurses' quarters, and also medical orderly quarters, and much more. Also, this whole complex was powered by a hydroelectric plant which was located down to the left of this picture in a deep gorge. Prior to the main construction, there was a lot of temporary buildings to be built. Also the clearing and levelling of the site. Here we see temporary accommodation being constructed out of bush materials. Many months later, construction began using permanent materials. Here we see some of the walls of one of the wards going up. Here we see a couple of the completed wards. Here we see the main administration building well underway with construction. And this is how the administration block looked after completion of construction. And this is a view of the doctor's residence. Back in the early days, about 1949, mission families were accommodated in bush houses that only lasted a few years. Firstly, to build these houses, ground was cleared and levelled. These temporary buildings were constructed of bush poles. Coarse bamboo-like grass was stuffed into the walls to provide insulation. Kunai grass was used for the thatching on the roofs of these buildings. And woven bamboo-like grass covered the walls. After crushing the bamboo, it was woven into sheets, and these sheets were called blind. As the bamboo was woven into sheets, it was rolled up behind them. When applied to the walls of a building, the buildings looked like this. All bush materials, a new station had been just established at 8,600 feet, and it was cold up there. This is typical of bush houses built as manse for missionary families. Here we see a new permanent manse built for the missionary family. House under construction. Here the roof framework has been completed. Here the weatherboards go on. And here we have the completed job. And here is a quick look at one of the bedrooms, complete with built-in wardrobes and drawers, etc. These all permanent buildings were fine. They were really great, but very costly. So, because of financial constraints, semi-permanent buildings were embarked upon. These semi-permanent houses rested on stones and were not anchored into the ground on cement posts, because there was never any strong winds in that area, so the posts weren't needed. I had a small one of this type of housing at the last stage of sawmilling. This pathway was made with black and white river pebbles pushed into the soft clay. As we have been talking about housing, I may as well lead on into sawmilling. There were no sawn timber supplies available in the Western Highlands where we were. To fly the timber in from the coast cost 5 pence a pound in those days, so we had to mill our own. After establishing a small portable sawmill, we milled there for quite a while, and then when supplies ran out, we moved it to a fresh new area. And there were plenty of tall timbers available high up in the mountains, as you see here. This picture was taken at the second site of the sawmill, and it was established right up in the mountains, right amongst the trees, so that the logs did not have to be dragged any great distance. But it was very damp right up there amongst the trees, and there was not enough room for the sawn timber to be stored. At the third mill site, it was put up near the bush, outside of the trees, where we had plenty of room and conditions were not so damp, so that the stacked boards would dry a lot quicker. The trees had to be felled with axes by hand to the length required and then pulled in by teams of men wearing thick ropes attached by chains onto the log. Very hard work, but they also had a lot of fun composing little two-line ditties and singing these so as to have a rhythm, so as to all jerk together on the rope at the same time. When we had plenty of labour, up to 200 there once, we could build up quite a stockpile of logs at the back of the mill. Here I'm sawing up a small log on the small portable saw bench. When we had logs that were too large for our small saw bench, it had to be cut in half by hand using the pit saw method. It was very hard yakka. As time went on, we were able to purchase a small D2 Caterpillar tractor. You can see it in the middle of the picture. With the tractor we were able to pull in the whole tree, minus the branches of course. Then the logs were cut to length right there at the mill. There, another shot of the saw in operation. After being sawn, the boards were then dressed before they went out into the stacks for drying. The boards being stacked out to dry in the timber yard. One of the greatest joys I had while sawmilling was to cut up some glorious cedar logs, glorious to look at and glorious to smell. Before we had roads and vehicles, everything had to be transported by foot and shoulders. This timber was carried out of the bush down to where there was a road. These roads were built by hand, cut out of the side of the hill, using shovels, maybe a few picks and pointed sticks. A woman carrying a large load of sweet potato and probably on top of that a pickaninny inside the net bag. They can carry 50 pounds or about 20 kilograms like this many kilometres. Not any stops either to rest, because they dare not rest. They could not get the net bag up on their heads again without someone to help them. And some of the women only weigh 40 or 50 pounds. The New Guinea people had no beasts of burden, only themselves to do all the carrying. Before we had roads, this was our lot, walking through the grass and bush. The trail was often boggy and through high pit bamboo-like grass. Missionaries going on safari to visit outstations. Some carriers on a shaped roadway. More carriers at work. As mentioned before, our portable sawmill had to be dismantled and carried each time we went to a new site. And this was done by many of the nationals carrying all this stuff on their shoulders. Taking the names of the carriers prior to setting out. There goes the petrol engine radiator. and there goes one of the saw bench leg sets. 8 or 10 years later, we had a few Land Rovers. Typical of a well-gravelled, decorated roadway. Carving out a new road by hand from the side of a mountain. Over a spur and right down into the river gorge below. On wet, boggy areas, logs had to be laid down first. When it was mooted to have roads built, we would think or say they won't be able to get a road through that gorge surely. But they did. The road ahead going down into the main river gorge below. And we had all sorts of roads. There were narrow roads, roadways carved out of a cliff face. Here we see 4 levels of the road zigzagging down the mountain side. And then it goes out into the valley at the foot of the mountain. And around after hillside after hillside. My little V-dub handled it all with great ease. As time went on, the main roads had to be widened. Here too it's being done by hand. Crossing the range into the Condep Valley to the south of the main mission field into a vast swampland and lake area. This is probably the highest crossing in the southern hemisphere at 10,000 feet, at least in this area. A small road bridge house put there to protect the logs and decking from the rains so they didn't rot out so quickly. We also had picturesque roads. In some places we had nicely decorated roads. Then there were serpentine roads. And in one place you could almost get a free car wash as you went by. It was a constant job to replace gravel on the smaller roads. And then we had lots of one-lane suspension bridges. These were the only type of bridges available in the early days, and they were built out of bush saplings and vines strung up into trees nearby. Looking across such a vine bridge, a vine and sapling bridge with split paling deckings about 100 feet across. This was across the raging main river Lye stream. Another view of this same bridge. Another view of the same bridge crossing during the dry season with very little water in the river. Much later, the government built a permanent steel rope bridge, and I milled the timber bearers for this job on our little portable sawmill. Another one of these puzzle pictures, how could they ever get a road through this mess of gorges and hills and gullies? But they did, and on down to the bridge which was just shown. A sharp turn off the end of this bridge. And a road on up into the blue yonder in the distance. Before I could move up to the third sawmill site, I had to put in a road and also build one bridge 60 foot long. First, a smaller log is placed over the stream, and then the main logs are slid across on this small one. The puzzle is find the log. It's in amongst all the log pullers somewhere. Four large, long logs were needed for this particular job. After all the logs are pulled across and put in place, then more river stones are put all around it to keep the logs from moving and to keep them from rotting quickly. This bridge house sample is a lot smaller than the one that I had built for the sawmill. I made sure that the bridge house was a lot longer than the logs so as to protect it from the rain. A typical footbridge before we had vehicles. New Guinea Lutheran Mission, Missouri Synod established about 20 main mission stations in that area of Papua New Guinea, and there was usually one or more expatriates stationed there. This is an aerial view of the high school, so there were quite a number of teachers, expatriate teachers there. This is the Aurelia mission station, the second one established in about 1949 or 1950. There were a few expatriates here because it was also used for language study as well as for religious lessons and preaching of a Sunday. This is another view of the high school, and there were quite a few teachers stationed there as well as some national teachers. An aerial view of the hospital complex soon after work was completed there. Then there was a business trading station set up right near the end of the Wapanamunda airstrip, and this company bought vegetables and coffee from the local people and shipped it out to the coast and brought in supplies of fuel and all sorts of groceries and building materials from the coast. In the early days, our only lifeline to the coast was through the wonderful old workhorse, the DC-3. Here you see fuel being unloaded and there's vegetables and stuff to go out to the coast. Then there was the main station set up as a school for missionaries' children. This is a small part of the complex there. When this was taken, there was a January annual conference of staff, and so there was a lot of vehicles parked there in front of the complex. Then there was the station called Yaibos, also on the main road, where there were all sorts of mission activities, maintenance, vehicle repair shop, a joinery shop, electrical workshop, plus several houses, and all of this complex fed by a small hydroelectric plant. And here is an aerial view of the school mentioned just before. This station at the western end of the main mission area, it's the station with the $1 million view of the mighty Strickland Gorge. All stations had good mountain views, as well as this station in the Manyamya area, which was built up by the Australian Lutheran Mission. All of the main stations are built right alongside of the main road. A medium-sized station with native gardens all around. A station built right at the foot of a very high mountain. And this is a small, fairly new station built at a high altitude of about between 7,000 and 8,000 feet. Every second year, over the range to the south of the Enga people, there occurred the world-famous and fabulous Mount Hagen Show extravaganza. Many, many thousands of Highland people laid aside their feuds with other language groups to make a display of their cultures, etc., there, right alongside Mount Hagen town. Many of the people from a long way walked in, maybe 100 kilometres or so, to attend this great display. Many came by vehicle and even some by plane. I was informed that at one show there was one small plane landing every 3 minutes, and all that without any control tower. At the height of the show, it was just an ocean of feathered, painted tribesmen. They all carried their spears and bows and arrows with them. What a mighty sight! But a sight that instilled some fear in one. What if someone forgot the peace agreements and speared someone? What if there was an accidental spearing? There could have been a mighty stoush, bigger than the big movie war scenes. There would be spears, arrows, skin, hair, feathers and blood flying in every direction. But, praise the Lord, it never happened, at least as far as I know. Many thousand of them just milling around, seeking different things to look at, different tribal customs, sideshows and the like. One year there was a total moon eclipse, and another year there was a total eclipse of the sun, and this was about 8 a.m. That day it was very cloudy and we could not see the eclipse, but it was scary for the people. Some just huddled around and some crawled under the stacks of timber at the sawmill. When it was our turn to go on holidays to the coast, it was great to see DC-3 supply plane overhead. But many a time the weather didn't permit the scheduled flight to get through, and we sat and we watched the skies endlessly, and we listened and listened, but nothing happened. When that happens, we had to go home and try to rustle up a bit to eat, as all the perishables had been used up. Try and sleep, then next day wait for the plane again. One of the biggest tasks that missionaries had was to reduce the Enga language to written form, as it had never been done before. Not being highly skilled in this sort of thing made it all the more harder to do. The Enga language is a true language in its own right. One thing about the Enga language that is rather special is the elaborate verb forms. There are 30 or more forms of each verb. When you use the right verb form, it would tell you lots of things, like gender, animate or inanimate, tense from far past to far future, whether sitting or standing, whether male or female, and so on. I spent a few months trying to learn the lingo there, but did not fare too well at my age. Now here is an old man with great character. His character seems to be etched in every line on his face, and no doubt he had great wisdom too. Now for a look at the beautiful place that the Enga people live in. A glimpse out through a gap in the trees to the valley beyond. A very steep mountain side. The third highest mountain, Mount Hagen, is shrouded up in the clouds, and the foothill buttresses face the river. Mountainsides and valleys carved by rain, storms, wind, sun, and eons of time. A view of the great Strickland Gorge. Clouds up above and scored valleys below. Once I walked through here, if you could call it walking, from left to right, a 45-degree hillside. The main Lye River carved its way down through these rocky mountains over many, many years of time. After the daily wet season rains, the mists lie in the valley as clouds hug the top of Mount Hagen. Seen from the air or flying out to the coast, a serpentine river wends its way towards the sea. A crater lake seen through a gap in the clouds as we fly overhead. Small woolly clouds seen below. Another stream winds its way looking for the sea. Flying level with the mountaintops, or almost anyhow. A beautiful wet season site, a storm head forms. Another storm head, much more developed. an anvil-shaped storm head after sundown. A typical everyday scene in the mid-morning of the wet season. Typical early morning mists covering the valley. A little storm starts to drop its load of water into the valley floor. Soon after the rains fall, there are thousands of rocky creeks where the water races down the mountainside. Typical rocky cascades. There are many thousands of falls on the mountain sides. Triple falls right along the roadside. On the main river there are many medium-sized falls. This huge fall is equipped with hydroelectric, and that supplies the town of Port Moresby. These much smaller falls is equipped with hydroelectric to supply one of our mission stations. A small cascade among the trees. Dainty filigree falls. Delightful light and shadows on the mountain side. Delightful shadows on the mountain sides. How great, marvellous and beautiful are your works, O Lord. No computer could do it so well and so beautifully. So, this has been an attempt to show you something about the Enga people in this small part of PNG, as it was in the 50s, the 60s and the 1970s. For me, it was great to be a part of the mission effort amongst the Enga people. It was great to see these people eager to hear God's word. It was great to see them being baptized and on the same day partaking of their first communion. It was great to see the change in their lives, a new life for them and with a new name for many of them. It was great to see them forming congregations and integrating the congregations into a church, originally called the Wabag Lutheran Church, and later known as the Good News Lutheran Church. It was great to see the children eagerly learning at schools. It was great to see them accepting Western medicines and general medical health. It was great for us to be able to teach them about germs, hygiene and cleanliness. It was great to be able to teach them skills like sewing cloth, carpentry, road and bridge building, etc. It was great to be able to improve their diet by introducing lots of new vegetables. It was great to see them accept government for the whole country and as well as local government councils. May God continue to bless them in this young developing country and especially in the young Good News Lutheran Church in Papua New Guinea. Amen.